There's a moment when everything you've ever been gets summed up in a single second. Not by a trophy on a wall, not by a title on a business card, not by anything you planned. Just a frozen doorway, a pale face, and 5 words you never expected to hear whispered in that particular voice, in that particular room. He stood there in his pressed gray suit, the kind of suit a young man buys specifically for a moment he thinks will define him. His resume was in his hand, edges crisp, probably printed on paper that cost more than he'd admit. He had rehearsed his handshake. I could tell. He had practiced his smile in some bathroom mirror that morning, adjusting it until it looked confident without seeming desperate. He had prepared for everything. He had not prepared for me. I was sitting at the head of the conference table when the door opened, my reading glasses resting on my nose, a cup of coffee going cold in front of me, a yellow legal pad covered in my own shorthand notes spread out to my left. The morning light was coming through the tall windows behind me, and I suppose from where he was standing in the doorway, with the light hitting him straight in the face, it took a second for his eyes to adjust. Then they adjusted. His face went the color of old chalk. The hand holding his resume lowered itself very slowly, like it had forgotten what it was supposed to be doing. His mouth opened, and then it closed again. And then it opened once more, and the words that finally came out were so quiet that the 2 other people in the room with me had to lean forward to catch them. "Sir," he whispered, "I didn't know it was you." I let the silence sit for exactly 3 seconds. I've learned over 62 years of living, and about 40 of those spent watching how people behave when they think nobody important is watching, that 3 seconds of quiet can say more than 3 minutes of words. Then I set my glasses down on the legal pad, folded my hands on the table, and looked at him the way I used to look at young lieutenants who just realized they'd made a very avoidable mistake. "I know you didn't," I said. "Please, come in. Have a seat." And that was the moment, the one that had been building for 2 years without either of us knowing it. 2 years of mornings in the lobby of the Whitmore building, of doors held open and packages moved and maintenance carts pushed aside without a word of acknowledgement. 2 years of my daughter's boyfriend walking past me the way a person walks past furniture. 2 years of a quiet man in work clothes being invisible. I want to tell you how we got there. I want to tell you all of it from the beginning, because a story like this doesn't start in a conference room. It starts in a parking lot with my daughter laughing at something I said, her hair catching the September light, her hand wrapped around a paper coffee cup, and a man I'd never met pulling up in a silver car and changing everything. But before I go back to that beginning, I want to talk to you for just a moment. Because if you've ever been overlooked, if you've ever been the person in the room that nobody thinks to address, the one who holds the door and gets no thank you, the one whose whole life and history and quiet work is invisible to someone too busy performing confidence to look up, then this story is for you. If it's already stirring something in you, leave a like on this video right now. It tells me this kind of story matters, and it helps other people find it who need to hear it too. And if you want to be here for the rest of what happened, because I promise you, we are only at the doorway so far, hit subscribe and stay with me. There is a lot more to this story, and I think, by the end of it, you'll understand why I didn't say a word to Marcus for 2 full years, why I watched and waited, and why, when the moment finally came, I didn't do it for myself at all. I did it for my daughter. Her name is Claire. Claire Elaine Mercer, though she's been Claire Elaine Patterson her whole life before this story begins, Patterson being my name, the name I've carried since my father handed it to me, along with the expectation that a man earns what he keeps and keeps what he earns. She was born on a Tuesday in October, 31 years ago, in a hospital in Davenport, Iowa, while a cold rain made quiet patterns on the windows and the parking lot below filled up with the wet shine of streetlights. I was 29 years old. My wife Sandra was exhausted and furious and magnificent, and when the nurse put that small, red-faced, absolutely ferocious-looking infant into my arms, I understood for the first time in my life what the word accountable really meant. Not the professional version. Not the bottom-line version I'd been practicing in boardrooms and on job sites since I was 23. The real version. The kind that doesn't clock out. Let me back up even further, because who I am matters to this story, and I was careful for most of my career not to advertise it. My name is Gerald Patterson. Jerry, to the people I've known long enough to trust. I'm 62 years old and I live in Ridgemont, Ohio, in a house on Clearwater Drive that Sandra and I bought in 1994, and that I have rattled around alone in since Sandra died of a cardiac event in 2019, 5 years ago now. Though there are still mornings when I come downstairs and expect to hear the coffee maker running and the radio on in the kitchen. There are still mornings when the silence is a physical thing. I spent 33 years building something. I won't bore you with all the details of it because this story isn't about business, not really. But the short version is that I started a facilities and property management company called Mercer Patterson Group, the Mercer being my college roommate, Dan Mercer, who died of cancer in 2011, and whose name I kept in the company title because I believe the dead deserve to be remembered by the living who benefited from knowing them. Over 3 decades, that company grew from Dan and me and 2 pickup trucks into a firm that manages 47 commercial and residential properties across 4 states, employs 112 people, and has its main office on the 16th floor of the Whitmore Building in downtown Ridgemont. The Whitmore Building, incidentally, is one of the properties we own. I mention that because it's relevant. I mentioned the word janitor in the title of this story, and I want you to understand exactly how I became the man that Marcus, my daughter's boyfriend, the man in the doorway, took for one. After Sandra died, I went through a period that I can only describe as a controlled unraveling. I kept the business running. I answered emails and signed contracts and made decisions that needed making because the company is other people's livelihoods and I don't get to fall apart at their expense. But outside of work hours, I disappeared. I stopped going to the club dinners and the civic events and the industry association meetings. I stopped driving the car that said successful and started driving the one that was comfortable. I started wearing what I wanted to wear instead of what the role required. Most mornings during that period I drove to the Whitmore Building early, 6:30, before the office staff arrived, before the tenants were in, before the elevator traffic started. I'd walk the building. I've been doing that since the beginning, since we first bought it. Walk the floors, check the maintenance logs, talk to the overnight crew, look at what needs attention with my own eyes instead of waiting for someone to report it to me. It's a habit I never broke, and after Sandra died, it became a kind of anchor. The building was something concrete and predictable and mine. I wore old clothes for those walks. Work pants, work boots, a jacket, or a canvas coat depending on the season. I carried my own coffee in a thermos. I talked to the custodial crew by name, Ramon and Delia, and a man everyone called Shu for reasons nobody could quite reconstruct. I knew where every utility panel was. I knew which freight elevator made a sound it shouldn't and which loading bay door needed its track adjusted. To anyone arriving at the Whitmore Building at 6:30 in the morning and seeing a man in work pants with a thermos and a maintenance clipboard, the conclusion was obvious. And the conclusion, in Marcus's case, never got corrected, because he never asked. That's the thing I want you to hold on to throughout this whole story. He never asked. He never asked my name. He never asked what I did. He never looked at me long enough with enough genuine curiosity to wonder anything at all. I was part of the scenery, the helpful piece of scenery that held doors and knew which entrance had the working keycard reader and which one stuck. But I'm getting ahead of myself. We need to go back to September. September, 2 years before the interview. Claire had moved to Ridgemont about 6 months before that. She'd been in Columbus for several years after finishing her master's in urban planning at Ohio State, working for a firm downtown, building a life that was hers and only hers. She's independent like that. Always has been. Even as a kid, she didn't want help she hadn't specifically requested. She'd rather figure something out slowly on her own than have it handed to her and feel like she owed the handing. Sandra used to say that Claire got my stubbornness and her grace, and I always thought that was Sandra being too generous about both of us. She'd moved back to Ridgemont because her firm opened a regional office there, which was a genuine professional opportunity, but I also think she came partly for me. After Sandra died, I imagine I seemed like a structure that needed watching. She'd call every few days, and there were things she listened for in my voice. I know that now, that I didn't always know I was broadcasting. She moved to an apartment on the 8th floor of the Whitmore Building, not because I suggested it, but because the building was nice and the location was right for her commute and the rent was fair. I did not tell her I owned the building, not because I was hiding it from her exactly, but because it hadn't come up yet, and because there was a part of me that liked watching her be independent without any shadow of my name on her ceiling. She paid her rent like any other tenant. She signed her lease without knowing, And I was going to tell her, I really was. But then September came and Marcus came with it, and somehow the timing kept sliding. I was in the lobby that first morning, talking with Ramon about a water pressure issue on the 4th floor, when Claire came in through the main entrance. She was carrying her work bag and the paper coffee cup and laughing at something her phone had said to her. A text from a friend, I think. And behind her, holding the door she'd just come through as though he'd always intended to hold it for the next person, was a tall man with dark hair and the particular brand of easy confidence that belongs to people who've been told they're exceptional for long enough that they've stopped bothering to verify it. That was Marcus. Marcus Webb. He was 34 years old, a finance professional of some description. I'd find out later he worked as a senior analyst for an investment firm in the building on the block behind ours. And he had been dating Claire for approximately 3 weeks at that point, which I discovered later as well, since Claire had been careful not to introduce us until she was sure it was worth introducing. She spotted me when she was halfway across the lobby. Her face lit up in the particular way it does when she sees me. A private, warm thing, not performed. "Dad," she said, and came and hugged me, and I held on to her for a moment the way fathers do when they've been a little too alone lately and are pretending they haven't noticed. "Morning," I said. "Water pressure problem on 4. Going to be a 20-minute delay on the east elevators." "Of course there is," she said in the affectionate, exasperated tone she uses when the building is being the building. And then she turned, and Marcus was standing just behind her, and she said, "Marcus, this is my dad, Gerald." He looked at me. Really looked at me, for what I would later understand was the only time he ever would. He took in the work pants and the thermos and the clipboard tucked under my arm, and something moved behind his eyes. A very quick, very small calibration. Not malicious, not even conscious probably, just the automatic categorizing that some people do when they meet someone who doesn't look like a threat or an opportunity. He shook my hand. His grip was fine. He said, "Nice to meet you," with exactly as much warmth as the situation seemed to require to him, and then he looked back at Claire and said something about finding coffee before the morning meeting, and that was that. That was the whole introduction. 30 seconds. Then he was walking toward the elevator bank, and Claire was giving me a look that was half apology and half, "Don't read too much into it," and I was standing there with my thermos and my clipboard thinking about the water pressure on the 4th floor. I didn't say anything. There was nothing to say yet. A man you've just met for 30 seconds hasn't owed you anything. Impressions are made in 30 seconds all the time, and they can be revised. I know that. I've revised a few of my own over the years, but the revision never came. Over the months that followed, I saw Marcus at the Whitmore building regularly, 2 or 3 times a week, sometimes more, because he'd started staying over at Claire's apartment, and that meant he was coming and going through the lobby in the mornings and evenings. Every time I was there in some capacity, talking with the maintenance crew, checking something on the lobby-level systems, coming or going from my early morning walk. Every time he registered me as he registered the key fob panel and the potted ficus near the entrance, something that was just there, part of the building's neutral background. He never said good morning. Not once. Not a nod, not a small lift of the chin that would have cost him absolutely nothing. When the lobby door was heavy because the pressure assist was out one February, I held it for him, thermos in one hand, door handle in the other, and he walked through without turning his head. Not even a reflex, thank you. Not even the automatic, meaningless kind that people produce without thinking. Just through and gone, and the door swinging back. That was when I started paying attention differently. Not angry attention. Not the kind that comes from injured pride. The quieter kind. The kind I learned years ago in a different context, in a different kind of work, before I was any kind of businessman at all. I spent 3 years in the Army before I built anything civilian. Military intelligence, though I won't go into the classified specifics because that's not the point here. The point is that those years taught me how to watch without signaling that you're watching, how to collect information patiently without rushing toward a conclusion, how to understand a person's real character not from what they say, but from how they behave when they believe nothing important is on the line. Marcus, when he believed nothing important was on the line, was a different person than the one he showed to Claire. And I don't think Claire could see the difference yet because she was still in the part of loving someone where the better version feels like the true version. The holiday season that year was the first time it moved from something I observed privately into something that had witnesses. Sandra's sister, my sister-in-law Barbara, came to visit at Thanksgiving and stayed through the weekend. I cooked. I've always cooked. It's one of the things I reclaimed from grief. And we had a real dinner at the house on Clearwater Drive, the table with the extra leaf put in, the good plates that Sandra picked out at a shop in Savannah, a turkey that I started 2 days in advance because Sandra always said I overcomplicate the turkey, and she was always right. Claire came, and she brought Marcus. He was charming at dinner. I want to be honest about that. He was funny and articulate, and he asked Barbara about her work in a way that seemed genuinely curious. He talked about finance in terms that made sense even to people who don't follow it closely. He refilled glasses. He complimented the turkey, which, fine, it deserved it that year. And then the dishes were being cleared, and I was in the kitchen with a stack of plates, and Marcus came in to set something on the counter, and Barbara followed him in to help, and Marcus looked at the organized way I'd preloaded the dishwasher and said, with an easy, comfortable laugh, "You know, Mr. Patterson, you would make an incredible building manager. You've got the mindset for it." He meant it as a compliment, I'm almost certain. That's what made it so precise an injury. He meant it generously, from inside his own fixed picture of who I was, with complete sincerity. A man who manages buildings for a living, receiving praise for being good at managing things. Barbara's eyes came to mine across the counter, very quick, a question in them. She knew. She's known for years what I built, and she knew what she'd just heard. I smiled at Marcus. I said, "Thank you. I've always found it satisfying work." He nodded, pleased, and went back to the dining room. Barbara looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, very quietly, "Are you going to say something?" "Not yet," I said. "Not tonight." She understood me well enough to let it alone. Winter that year was long the way Ohio winters get long. Not dramatically brutal, but persistent, gray, and wearing. January felt like 3 separate months. I saw Marcus at the Whitmore building regularly, and the pattern held with a consistency that I would have admired as discipline if it hadn't been so clearly unconscious. He simply never looked at me. Not with hostility, not with calculated dismissal, with nothing at all. In February, Claire called me on a Sunday afternoon, and there was something careful in her voice. She said Marcus and she had been talking about the future, that the relationship was serious. She wanted me to know that, and she wanted me to give him a chance. The particular phrasing she used told me she'd noticed I'd been quiet about him, and that the quiet worried her more than an objection would have. "I am giving him a chance," I said, because it was true. "You barely say anything when he's there," she said. "I'm listening," I said. "I've always been more of a listener." She laughed a little, reluctant. "That's true. Mom always said you listen too loudly." Sandra used to say that. Listening too loudly. Her phrase for the way I can pay attention so completely that people feel it. I was glad Claire remembered it. I was glad she could still say it without crying, which she hadn't been able to do for a while after Sandra died. We talked for an hour about other things, and I decided not to say anything about Marcus yet, because what I knew was still a collection of observations, and a father who comes to his daughter with a collection of observations about her boyfriend's manners can do more damage than the manners themselves. Spring came and went without incident. The Whitmore building went through a renovation cycle on its 5th and 6th floors, which meant more workmen in the lobby, more noise, more logistics, and my early morning walks were more involved than usual. I spent more time in the building than I might have otherwise, and I saw Marcus more often because of it. It was on a morning in early June, 6:45, before the building was properly awake, that the incident happened that shifted things from observation to concern. I was by the service entrance on the ground floor, talking with 2 of the workers about the elevator inspection that was due at the end of the week, when I heard the door at the top of the service stairs bang open, the one that connects the 8th floor to the utility stairwell. Maintenance workers use it. Residents aren't supposed to. But the locks weren't what they should have been on that stairwell, something I was already in the process of addressing. I heard 2 voices. One of them was Claire's. The other was Marcus, and he was angry in the particular way that men are angry when they've decided that the room they're in is private, which is to say, unguardedly, not performing, not managing it for an audience. Just the real, full sound of it, coming down the stairwell, bouncing off the concrete walls. I won't reconstruct the exact conversation here, because some of it isn't mine to repeat, but I'll tell you what I heard clearly enough that I've never forgotten it. He was criticizing something she'd done, a social decision, a choice she'd made about a friend, something small and personal and completely hers to make, and the tone of it was not a disagreement between equals. It was a correction. A superior correcting a subordinate who should have known better. And then I heard Claire's voice. Quiet, brief, a word or two. Conciliatory in a way I did not recognize as hers, because Claire does not conciliate without reason. She debates. She explains her thinking. She pushes back. The voice I heard in that stairwell was not the voice of someone pushing back. It was the voice of someone trying to make the temperature in the room go down. I stood very still by the service entrance. The two workers had gone quiet. None of us looked at each other. The voices moved away after another moment. The stairwell door closed. I heard the elevator on the other side of the ground floor lobby arrive and depart. I stood there with my thermos for what was probably 30 seconds and felt something solidify in me that had, until that moment, only been a suspicion. And then I made myself finish the conversation with the workers about the elevator inspection, because panicking in front of your employees solves nothing, and because I had learned, in a different life, that the most useful thing a person can do when they've received difficult information is to take a breath and think clearly about what comes next. I called Claire that evening. I didn't mention the stairwell. I talked about ordinary things, listened to her tone, asked how work was going, noted how she sounded when she mentioned Marcus's name. She sounded fine. Or she sounded like someone who had gotten good at sounding fine. In July, Claire came to the house for Sunday dinner, alone, which was unusual, and which she explained by saying Marcus was visiting his brother in Pittsburgh, and I told myself that was perfectly normal. She seemed genuinely lighter that day, easier in her movements, quicker to laugh. The version of herself that she'd been at 17, sprawled across the couch with her shoes off, and her thoughts arriving in the order they felt like arriving. She helped me make pasta, which is a project because I make it from scratch, the way Sandra's mother did it. And we talked for 3 hours about things that mattered, and things that didn't. At one point, she leaned against the kitchen counter and said, with the particular seriousness she reserves for things she's thought about for a long time, "I'm going to be okay, Dad. You know that, right? Whatever happens." I said, "I know that. I've always known that." What I didn't say was that whatever happens worried me a little, that it sounded like she was already considering possibilities she hadn't named yet. August brought the moment that took everything from something is wrong to I have to do something about this. We had a family cookout at my house. Me, Claire, Barbara, Barbara's husband Frank, their son and his wife, and Marcus. A hot Saturday, the kind that makes Ohio feel like it's trying to prove something, the kind where even the shade feels like it's working against you. I grilled. Barbara made potato salad the way she's made it for 25 years. There was beer and lemonade and a radio on the porch playing something that nobody was quite listening to. Marcus was pleasant for most of the afternoon. He was good at pleasant, I'll give him that. He talked football with Frank, who was grateful for any talkable subject, and he helped Claire carry things from the kitchen to the patio table, and he laughed at things people said in a way that seemed mostly real. And then, late in the afternoon, when the afternoon was starting to loosen, and people were on their second or third drinks, something happened. Claire reached across the patio table to get the salt and the sleeve of her shirt. It was a lightweight summer shirt, short-sleeved, rode up, and for just a moment, just a passing second, I saw the inside of her upper left arm. There was a bruise there, not a fresh one, yellowing, starting to fade, oblong, the shape and position of something that comes from a grip. I looked up from her arm and found Marcus watching me, not alarmed, not caught, just watching, very level, to see what I would do. I did nothing that he could see. I looked back down at my plate and reached for my own drink and continued whatever sentence I'd been in the middle of with Barbara. And the afternoon continued, and the radio kept playing, and I kept my face completely easy and my hands completely still, and somewhere in my chest something very cold and very old got very quiet in exactly the way it learned to get quiet in a different life. 35 years ago, when I was a 25-year-old reading a situation in a room where showing your reaction was the worst possible thing you could do. After everyone left, I stood in my kitchen for a while with the lights on and the quiet of the empty house around me, and I made some decisions. The first was that I would not go to Claire with what I'd seen. Not yet. Because a daughter who is not ready to hear it will close a door that it takes years to reopen, and the most important thing was that the door stayed open. The second was that I would find out whether Marcus had any professional interest that I could become relevant to, because I had been watching for months, and I knew that Marcus moved through the world looking for people who were useful to him, and I had spent 30 years being useful in ways nobody had yet explained to him. My HR director, a woman named Phyllis Okafor, who has been with me for 14 years, and who I trust with most of the things I'd trust to almost no one, had been telling me for 2 months that we needed a new director of acquisitions. It was a real position. It paid well. Marcus's background, finance, analysis, property-adjacent investment work, was arguably a genuine fit on paper, if not in character. I didn't create the position to trap him. The position already existed, already needed filling. But I called Phyllis the Monday morning after the cookout and told her to make sure the posting was circulated to firms in our sector, including the investment firm in the next block, the one that employed a senior analyst named Marcus Webb. "Should I flag anything particular about the candidate pool?" Phyllis asked. "No," I said. "Let the applications come in. Screen them normally. If Marcus Webb applies, route his file to me along with the others." There was a pause. Phyllis has worked with me long enough to understand the pauses in my instructions. "Understood," she said. "Marcus applied in September. I know because Phyllis sent me the file and I looked at his resume the way I had once looked at personnel files. Carefully. Completely, without prejudice toward any particular conclusion. His qualifications were genuinely adequate, not exceptional. He'd inflated 1 or 2 things in the wording, which is common and tells you something specific about a person. But the underlying substance was real enough. His cover letter was confident, well-written. The particular kind of well-written that comes from multiple careful revisions, which I respect even when I don't respect the person who produced it. Phyllis scheduled his interview for the 3rd Tuesday of October. Our standard process for a director-level hire involves an initial screening interview with HR, a second interview with the hiring manager, in this case, my VP of Strategy, a man named Theodore Burrell, and then a final interview with me. The first 2 interviews went fine, apparently. Phyllis said he was polished and personable. Theodore said he asked good questions. Neither of them knew anything about Claire or about the lobby or about any of it, because I had not told them, and I would not have told them. Hiring decisions at my company are made on professional grounds, and what I was doing here was not intervening in a hiring decision. I was observing a character. The final interview was on a Wednesday morning in October. I arrived at the office at 7, which is early even for me, and I sat in the conference room with Phyllis and Theodore and my coffee and my legal pad, and I waited. At 9:15, there was a knock on the conference room door. The door opened, and there he was in his pressed gray suit with his crisp resume and his practiced smile and every preparation he had made for the most important morning of his professional year. He looked at me. The smile stayed on for about 2 seconds, and then it did something I can only describe as collapsing from the inside out, the way a building loses its structure when the load-bearing wall goes, everything still briefly in place, and then nothing where the foundation was. "Sir," he whispered, "I didn't know it was you." I let the silence sit for 3 seconds. Then I said, "I know you didn't. Please, come in. Have a seat." He came in. He sat down. He put his resume on the table in front of him, very carefully, the way a person sets down something fragile they've just realized they're holding. His face was working very hard at composure. I gave him credit for that. It's not easy to compose yourself in a moment like that, and most people, in my experience, make it worse by trying too hard. He made it worse by trying too hard, his jaw set a little too deliberately, his posture a little too corrected, but he managed to look mostly like a person instead of a photograph of a person, which was something. I let Theodore start, which was the professional procedure, and also gave Marcus a minute to recalibrate, which was a courtesy I offered without announcing it. Theodore asked him about his experience with acquisition analysis, about portfolio evaluation, about his approach to risk. Marcus answered. His answers were good. His voice was steady. I'll say this for him. He's not without ability. I had always known that, from watching him, from the resume, from what Claire had told me about his career over the many months I'd been listening carefully to everything she said about him. I let 30 minutes pass. I took notes on my yellow legal pad. I asked 1 or 2 clarifying questions about methodology. And then I set down my pen and I folded my hands on the table and I said, Marcus, Can I ask you something a little different? He looked at me. He was braced for it. I could see that. He'd spent the last 30 minutes waiting for it, which is its own kind of difficult. Of course, he said. When you go somewhere, I said, a building, a business, a room, what do you pay attention to? He blinked. It wasn't the question he'd expected. Sorry? What do you notice? What are you looking at? He thought about it, which was good. He could have deflected or given a generic answer, and he didn't. He said, the people, I suppose. Who's in charge, who's not. What the dynamic is. And the people who aren't in charge, I said. What do you notice about them? A pause. I notice if things are running well, if the people doing the operational work are doing it efficiently. Do you talk to them? Another pause, longer this time. Sometimes. Sometimes, I said. I let that word live in the room for a moment. Then I said, I spent 2 years watching you walk through the lobby of this building, Marcus. Every morning, sometimes evenings. The people you walked past, Ramon, who's been on this building's custodial team for 11 years, Delia, who has 2 kids in college, a man everyone calls Shu who comes in at 5:30 every morning so the lobby is clean before the first tenants arrive. You never said good morning to any of them, not once. You never said thank you when someone held a door. You looked through people the way you look through glass. He said nothing. His face had gone past pale into something more complicated. I'm not telling you this as a gotcha, I said, and I meant it. I'm telling you this because I'm 62 years old and I've built something real, and the thing that matters most to me, more than the acquisitions, more than the portfolio, more than any of the professional work you'll have seen in our filings, is the people who are inside whatever I'm building with me. I see them. I've always seen them. I think seeing people clearly, all the people, not just the ones who look useful, I think that's the difference between someone who can manage things and someone who can actually lead them. The room was very quiet. Phyllis was looking at her notepad. Theodore was looking at the table. Marcus was looking at me. I uncapped my pen and made a note on the legal pad. I'm going to be honest with you about something else, I said. My daughter is Claire Patterson, who I believe you know. The sound he made was not quite a word. Something from the back of the throat. I haven't told her I was conducting this interview, I said. That's important for you to hear. This meeting was real, the process was real, and I haven't used it to communicate anything to Claire. Whatever is happening in your personal life is not on trial in this room. Do you understand me? Yes, he said, very quiet. But I want you to understand, I said, that I'm not a piece of furniture. And the people who work in buildings I own are not pieces of furniture. And my daughter. I stopped, and I kept my voice exactly level, which cost me something, is not a piece of furniture either. I did not say the word bruise. I did not say anything specific about the August cookout. I did not threaten. I stated, very plainly, the nature of the world as I saw it, and I left it there. Marcus sat in that chair for a long moment, and then something happened that I had not expected and that I want to be honest about, because I think the truth matters more than a clean story. He started to cry, not dramatically, not performatively. He didn't cover his face or make a sound. His eyes filled, and one tear went down his right cheek, and he let it go without touching it, which, in my experience, is what real tears look like on people who don't usually show them. I know what I've been, he said. I know. I've known for a while. I looked at him for a long moment, and then I said, knowing and changing are different things. Yes, he said, they are. We ended the interview shortly after. I thanked him professionally for his time because I am not in the business of humiliating people, and I told him we would be in touch regarding the position, which was true. Phyllis and Theodore and I would make a fair decision based on the full picture. He stood, he shook my hand, and he said, Mr. Patterson, I'm sorry. I believed that he was, in that moment. What I also knew, from 30 years of watching people, and from that cold, quiet place inside me that the Army put there, and that life has kept polished, was that sorry in a conference room and changed in the world are also different things. I called Claire that evening. I told her I had something I needed to say to her, and I asked if she could come to the house on Clearwater Drive, and she said she'd be there in 20 minutes. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, her hands around a mug of tea, and I told her about the Whitmore building. All of it. That I owned it. That I'd watched Marcus for 2 years. That I'd seen what I'd seen in the stairwell and at the cookout. That he had walked into an interview with me that morning not knowing who I was. I told her about the bruise. She didn't say anything for a long time. She stared at her tea, and I watched the expressions moving through her face like weather. I watched her not cry, and then I watched her cry. And then I watched her stop crying and sit up a little straighter. And when she looked at me, I saw Sandra in her. Not in sadness, but in the particular resolute clarity that Sandra got when she'd made a decision and was not going to be talked out of it. I need to leave him, she said. Not a question. Yes, I said. I've known for a while, she said. I kept thinking I could. I thought if I was just... I know, I said. You should have told me about the building. Yes, I said. I should have. I'm sorry. We sat there for another hour. She told me things I had guessed at and things I hadn't. I listened in the way that costs something, the way that doesn't flinch and doesn't rush to fix. At the end of the hour, she said she needed to go home and think, and I walked her to her car, and before she got in, she held on to me for a moment the way she used to as a child, completely, with her whole self, the way children hold people when they're certain of being held back. I've got you, I said. I know, she said. I've always known. The months that followed were not simple, because they never are. Claire moved out of the Whitmore building apartment. She found a place 2 neighborhoods over, a smaller one, but on a street with a coffee shop she liked, and a park where she could run in the mornings, and she put plants on the windowsill and made it hers quickly, which is something I watched her do with admiration. She filed for a domestic protection order, because the bruise had not been the only incident, only the one I'd seen, and her lawyer, a sharp, unhurried woman named Grace Allison, who came recommended by Phyllis, who knows everyone useful in Ridgemont, advised her to document what she could and prepare for a formal legal process. There was a court date in February. I sat in that courtroom in a suit I hadn't worn in a while, the kind I wore when I still attended industry events, and I watched my daughter sit at a table and tell the truth about what had happened to her in plain, unsparing sentences. She didn't embellish. She didn't perform. She just told it, and the telling was enough, because truth, stated without decoration, has a weight that manufactured drama can't match. Marcus sat at the opposite table. He had a good lawyer, which I had expected. His lawyer tried several angles, none of which were effective, in part because the evidence Claire and Grace Allison had assembled was thorough, and in part because Marcus, when it came to it, did not contradict Claire's account. His lawyer asked him at one point to characterize his relationship with Claire, and he said, I was not a good partner to her. I made choices I can't undo. He stopped. I'm trying to understand why. I don't know if he meant it. I hope he did, for his sake, not for mine. The judge granted the protection order and set terms for the separation of their shared assets, which were limited but real. The whole proceeding took most of a morning, and when it was over, and Claire and I walked out of the courthouse into the February cold, the particular sharp, honest cold of Ohio in the middle of winter, the kind that means business, she stopped on the top step and breathed in once, very deeply, and let it out slowly, and I watched some of the held-in weight of the past year leave her body with that breath. Okay, she said. Yeah, I said. We went and got lunch at a place on Morris Street that does a good soup, and we sat by the window and talked about everything other than the courtroom, and it was, improbably, one of the better lunches I've had in recent memory. The Marcus Webb file at Mercer Patterson Group was ultimately closed without an offer. Phyllis handled the communication, professional and neutral, citing the competitive candidate pool. We hired instead a woman named Sarah Dodd, who came from a background in municipal planning and who, in her second week, stopped to thank Shu by name for holding the elevator, which Shu clearly didn't know how to process, but which told me everything I needed to know about how the next several years were going to go. The spring that followed was one of those springs that feels like an apology from winter. It came in warm and committed, with real conviction, the magnolia trees on Clearwater Drive doing what they do every April, which is make everything look briefly like a painted version of itself. Claire started a weekly dinner at her new apartment, just close people, rotating, whoever was free, no occasion required. She started coming to things she'd been absent from. Started calling old friends she'd let get quiet while she was with Marcus. Friends who, with the generosity that good friendships have, didn't make her explain the silence before letting her back in. I started going to things too. I'd been absent from a lot, in my own way, not from the business but from the larger world around it. An old Army contact named Jim Petrie, who I'd stayed loosely in touch with for 30 years, called me that spring and told me about a mentorship program at a community college in Ridgemont for young people interested in business and property management, and asked if I'd ever thought about being involved. I said I'd think about it, and then I thought about it for about 48 hours, which is how long I usually need to decide something I've already decided. I met with the program director the following week. Her name was Alice Ewan, and she was 32. And she had the particular combination of practical energy and genuine idealism that I find most useful in young professionals. And within half an hour, I had agreed to be a quarterly guest speaker and a one-on-one mentor for 2 students per semester. My neighbor, a retired school principal named Lawrence, who has been unsubtle about his concern for my social life since Sandra died, noticed me coming and going with more purpose that spring, and said one evening, leaning on the fence between our yards with his arms crossed and the satisfied look of someone whose conspiracy has worked, "You seem lighter lately, Jerry." "Don't ruin it," I said. He grinned. Too late. One evening in May, I was babysitting my nephew's daughter, my brother's grandkid, a 7-year-old named Hazel, who has opinions about everything and reserves the right to change them without explanation. We were doing a puzzle on the living room floor, a complicated one involving a lighthouse and a great deal of very similar-looking blue sky. And Hazel, without looking up from the puzzle pieces she was sorting, said, "Papa Jerry, did somebody hurt Aunt Claire?" I was quiet for a moment, setting a piece of lighthouse against another piece of lighthouse. "Somebody was not very kind to her for a while," I said. "But she's okay now. She found her way out." Hazel considered this with the gravity that 7-year-olds apply to information they take seriously. She picked up a puzzle piece, tried it in 2 places, set it down. Then she said, "How did she find the way out?" "She was brave," I said, "and she had people around her who loved her." "Did you help?" "I tried to," I said. "You don't always know if you helped. You just try." Hazel nodded slowly, like that was a reasonable answer to file away. Then she found the piece that I'd been looking for 10 minutes, and clicked it into place with the immediate satisfaction of the unjustly overlooked, and said, "We should put the ocean part together next." "Agreed," I said. In the fall, about 8 months after the court date, a letter arrived at my house on Clearwater Drive. Hand-addressed, sent through the post, which in itself told me something. Marcus's handwriting. I didn't know it, but something about the address being written carefully, deliberately, told me who it was before I'd turned the envelope over. I read it that evening after dinner, at the kitchen table with my reading glasses on and a cup of coffee beside me. It was 2 pages, handwritten on plain white paper. He wrote about what he had been, and what he understood now that he hadn't understood then. About control, and about the way he had learned, somewhere along the way, to treat people as scenery, and about the work he was doing, with a therapist, to understand where that had come from, and what it had cost him, and the people he'd chosen to cost it to. He said he was not writing to ask anything. He said he knew that forgiveness, if it ever existed in a situation like this, was not his to request on any timetable. He said he hoped Claire was well. He did not say he was sorry about the lobby or the maintenance cart or the doors he'd walked through without a backward glance. But I thought that was in there, between the lines, folded into the larger accounting he was trying to do. I showed it to Claire the next Sunday at the weekly dinner she was hosting. She read it at her kitchen counter while the pasta water came to a boil, and I watched her read it, 2 pages, front and back, in the same careful handwriting. And when she finished, she set it down and was quiet for a moment. "Do you think he means it?" she said. "I think he's starting to," I said. "Whether he finishes the work is up to him." She nodded. She turned back to the stove. Then she said, without turning around, "I'm not ready to forgive him. I don't know if I ever will be. Is that okay?" "It's completely okay," I said. "Forgiveness is for you, when you're ready, if you ever are. It doesn't owe anything to him." She turned around then and looked at me for a moment across the kitchen. "Where did you learn that?" "Took a while," I said. "I didn't know it when I was your age." She went back to the pasta. Outside, through the window above her kitchen sink, the October trees were doing what October trees in Ohio do, putting on the last extravagance of the season before the cold settles in for good. All that red and gold and rust, the colors of something winding down, and also, if you're in the right frame of mind, of something offering everything it has before it rests. The dinner that night was loud and warm and ran long, the way good dinners do when people are genuinely glad to be in the same room. Barbara and Frank came, and Jim Petrie and his wife came, and two of Claire's friends from work were there, and Hazel came with her parents and monopolized the conversation for a solid 20 minutes with a detailed account of a disagreement she'd had with a classmate about the correct color of the sky, which turned out to be more philosophically complex than I'd have expected. After most people had gone, and it was just Claire and me washing up in her kitchen, her washing, me drying, which is the same division we'd always had at the house on Clearwater Drive, the division of labor that Sandra and I had practiced for 20 years and that Claire had absorbed without knowing she was absorbing it. I said, "How are you?" Actually? She thought about it the way she thinks about real questions, which is seriously and without rushing. "I'm good," she said. "Not the kind of good where you're pretending. The actual kind." "Yeah?" "I feel like myself again," she said. I forgot what that felt like. I didn't realize how long I'd been not quite myself. She handed me a bowl to dry. "You know what I mean?" "I do," I said. "I really do." We finished the dishes in the comfortable quiet that you only have with people you don't need to perform for. And when I drove home that night, down the November streets of Ridgemont with the bare trees along Morris Avenue and the orange light of the street lamps on the wet pavement, I thought about what I wanted to say about all of this. What the whole long story, the lobby, the maintenance cart, the Thanksgiving dinner, the stairwell, the August cookout, the conference room, the courtroom, the pasta water in October, what all of it actually taught me. I want to try to say it now. The first thing is about visibility, about who gets seen and who doesn't. I spent 2 years in that lobby as the man nobody important looked at, and I want to be honest with you, I was lucky. I could afford the experiment. I was choosing invisibility as a kind of test, from a position of real power, and I was safe in that choice in a way that Ramon and Delia and Shu are not safe. They don't have a second identity to reveal. That lobby is the full picture, for them, and the way Marcus moved through it, without acknowledgement, without curiosity, without the basic human courtesy of a good morning, is not just a character flaw, it's a statement about whose life is worth noticing and whose is just backdrop. The people who do the work that holds a building up, the ones who come in before anyone else and leave after most have gone, the ones who fix what's broken and clean what's dirty and make it possible for the important work to happen in the temperature-controlled rooms above. They deserve to be seen. That's not a radical claim. It's just true. And if you're the kind of person who can only see people who appear to be above you on some invisible ladder, you will miss most of the world, and you will miss most of what matters, and eventually, not always, but sometimes, if there's enough patience and enough quiet work being done at the right level, the world will rearrange itself to show you what you missed. The second thing is about strength. I hear the word strength used a lot, in a lot of different ways, and most of the ways I hear it used are wrong. Strength isn't volume. It isn't domination or intimidation or the ability to make a room afraid of you. That's just noise. Real strength is the ability to stay calm when things are not calm, to act precisely when precision matters, to hold your reaction in the moments that don't call for reaction, and then to give it fully in the moment that does. I stayed quiet in that lobby for 2 years. I stayed quiet at Thanksgiving, when Marcus told me I'd make a good building manager, and I thanked him like I meant it because in the world he was imagining for me, it was a genuine compliment. I stayed quiet through the winter and the spring and the summer, watching, listening, paying attention, building a picture. And when the moment came, the conference room, the gray suit, the practiced smile, I didn't shout. I didn't threaten. I sat at the head of the table and said what was true, in the order it needed to be said, and I let the truth do its own work. Strength, when you're 62, isn't loud. It's quiet. It's patient. It's the accumulated weight of everything you've lived through and every decision you've made, waiting calmly for the exact moment it can be of some use. The third thing is about daughters, about children, about the particular helplessness of watching someone you love move through a danger you can see but they can't or won't or aren't ready to. I got this wrong in one direction. I waited when I should have said something sooner, and my reasoning was protective but also cowardly. And I know that now. A father who tells himself he's waiting for the right moment is sometimes a father who is afraid of damaging something that is already being damaged. I should have spoken earlier. I'm sorry I didn't. I think about that part still. But I also think about the Sunday dinner in July, when Claire leaned against the kitchen counter and told me she was going to be okay, whatever happened. And I think about the fact that she found her own way to the decision she needed to make. I didn't make it for her. When she sat across from me at the kitchen table on the night I told her everything, she sat up straighter and said, "I need to leave him," not as a question, and not as a request for permission, but as something she had already arrived at on her own schedule. I was there. That's all. Sometimes being there is the whole job. And the last thing, the thing I keep coming back to, the thing that feels like the heart of it, is this. A person can be invisible for a long time and still be there, still be capable, still be watching, still be ready. The world makes people invisible all the time, and most of the time they don't have the option I had of choosing it or stepping out of it. But invisible is not the same as absent. Quiet is not the same as empty. And the people who walk past you without asking your name, who move through the space you maintain and the doors you hold and the work you do without registering any of it, those people are not seeing the room they're in. They're seeing a stage set they've constructed in their own heads, populated with whoever they've decided matters. And that is not wisdom. That is a very expensive blindness. I hope Marcus does the work. I genuinely do, and not abstractly when he's a real person, with real capacities, who learned some wrong things about how to be in the world, and hasn't yet, when last I knew, finished unlearning them. I hope the letter was real. I hope the therapy is real. I hope he finds out, through genuine effort rather than through the shock of a conference room, what it feels like to actually see the people around him. I hope that for his sake, not for mine, not for Claire's, because Claire is already on the other side of needing anything from him. Just for his. If you've made it to this point, if you've been with me through the whole lobby and the Thanksgiving dinner and the stairwell and the August afternoon and the gray suit in the doorway and the courthouse in February and the October dinner and the puzzle with Hazel and all the rest of it, then I want you to know that I'm grateful for that. Stories like this one don't get told easily, and they don't get heard easily either, because they ask something of you. They ask you to hold someone else's complicated, imperfect, unfinished truth for a while. And you did, and that matters. If this story touched something in you, if it stirred something you recognize, something you've lived or witnessed or carried, please leave me a comment below. Tell me what it brought up. Tell me your own story if you have one. Tell me even if it's just to say you were here and you heard it, because that counts for more than I can explain without getting embarrassing about it. And if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button and leave a like on this video, because these stories, the real ones, the ones that don't wrap up neatly and don't offer easy villains or uncomplicated heroes, these are the ones that deserve to travel. They deserve to find the people who need them. Help me make sure they do. The magnolia trees on Clearwater Drive are budding again. It's April. Another spring that feels like a fresh start, which is what April does, reliably, every year, which is one of the things I love about it. Sandra's coffee maker is still on the counter where she left it. I use it every morning. I make it with the same ratio she used, which I spent an embarrassing amount of effort figuring out after she died, because the proportions mattered and she'd never written them down. Claire is coming for dinner on Sunday. She's bringing a friend, just a friend, someone new, from work. And she mentioned it carefully, the way you mention something new that you don't want to jinx by putting too much weight on it. I said, "That sounds nice." She said, "Don't be weird about it." I said, "I am never weird about anything." She laughed the real laugh, the one that sounds like her mother's. I'm 62 years old. I know what I've built and what I've lost and what I'm still building. I know which elevator makes the wrong sound and which loading bay door sticks. I know Ramon's kids' names and Delia's coffee order, and the reason everyone calls Shu what they call him, which is a long story involving a misdelivered package in 2008 that I'll tell some other time. I know that the most important thing I've ever done is answer the phone, is shown up, is stayed in the room and held the door and kept watching, quietly from the place where nobody important thought to look. That's what I know. And that's enough.